There aren't too many scenarios where I'm willing to move down from number 4 in this year's draft. However, could the Indiana Pacers once again be an ideal trade partner for the Sacramento Kings? The Pacers have the 6th pick. They want to move up to 4. The Kings swap 6 and 4. What could the Kings get in addition to that? Could it be Malcolm Brogdon, future draft compensation? Both? Here to help me answer some of those questions and have fun with this hypothetical conversation, I'm going to be joined by Tony East, host of the Locked On Pacers podcast, right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. This is going to be my 9th season covering Kings basketball professionally. I'm in my 5th year hosting the Locked On Kings podcast, and I currently work for ABC 10 News in Sacramento. And really the beauty of the Locked On Podcast Network is that during this time of year when there's so many hypothetical trades and hypothetical draft scenarios that can happen, because there's a host for every single team in the NBA, we can basically put on our general manager hat and become the GM of our team. So having Tony East here, the today general manager of the Locked On Pacers, while I am the acting general manager of the Locked On Kings for this hypothetical draft trade night conversation, it makes for really, really fun, I think, podcast, great banter between the two teams. And we don't just do this for the sake of our own shows. We also have the yearly Locked On NBA Ultimate Mock Draft coming up, which is where the entire Locked On NBA team, our cluster of shows, we come together for a massive mock draft covering the entire first round, not just the lottery, the entire first round, where we can trade our pick, we can make selections. We'll have analysts, draft analysts, big names, local names. It's a show that we put a lot of work into every single year. It's always extremely popular, and you best believe I already have a lot of trade conversations going on surrounding this number 4 pick with that show. And maybe, just maybe, the conversation that I have today with Locked On Pacers host Tony East might end up being the trade that I pulled the trigger on, if at all, for this ultimate mock draft. I've seen conversations about Malcolm Brogdon. Could the Kings find a way to get Brogdon as part of this 4-for-6 swap? But could the Kings potentially get even more than Malcolm Brogdon in that move? How desperate would the Pacers be to move up to 4, assuming it's Jaden Ivey that they really want? I'll try and push. I'll try and see how much I could potentially get out of the Pacers. I hope you enjoy this conversation. The way Tony and I did this recording, the first segment that I'm playing for you here is just the Kings perspective. Then we recorded a second segment that's going to be on a future episode of Locked On Pacers that I encourage you to go and check out. Plus, we have a national guest, a national episode or interview for you at the end of this podcast. I'll explain a little bit more after my conversation with Tony East. Will the Kings move up? Will the Kings move down? Can the Indiana Pacers move up? So many questions, still so much time before the draft itself. And this is the time for speculation and the fun, one of my favorite parts of this time of year. And here we are, the Sacramento Kings, Indiana Pacers, after pulling off a big, someone call it blockbuster trade at the trade deadline. Suddenly, we're in trade conversations again. Tony East, will the Kings and Pacers find a way to be draft night trade partners? Would the Sacramento Kings consider moving down to 6? What would they need from the Pacers in order to move down to 6? What would the Pacers do with number 4? We're going to try and answer as many of these questions as we possibly can. Welcome back, Tony. Has your fan base turned on you and turned on the trade yet? Are they still in love with Tyrese Halliburton and what everything's going on over there? Because Kings fans still miss Tyrese Halliburton big time, but are excited about Domantas Sabonis.
Yeah, Pacers fans are excited about the trade still. Halliburton looks like he could be maybe the best point guard the franchise has had in like 2 decades already. And he's only played 26 games for the team. And Buddy Hield decided to remember how to pass and defend a little bit in Indiana. So, yeah, Pacers fans are pretty happy with this trade. And I think they'd be happy if Kevin Pritchard and Monty McNair continued to call each other as this draft process heats up.
It would not shock me, as much as we know that this is kind of a fun, like fantasy hypothetical element to this. It would not surprise me at all if there are phone calls happening between the Kings and the Pacers again. Like, it makes a tremendous amount of sense. There could be players that the Kings are willing to take in that 6 range that make more of a fit sense than a best player available sense. The Kings were expecting to be in that 7 range and got lucky moving up to 4 in the draft lottery. And we know when the Kings have moved up in the past, it hasn't quite gone too well. But it's all about, from a Sacramento perspective, Tony, what the Kings could get in addition to the 6th pick in order to be willing to move down 2 spots, because a lot can change, a lot can happen in 2 spots. Also, what happens in the top 3 really affects this decision. But I think for this exercise, we should assume that the hypothetical consensus top 3 of Paulo, Chet, Jabari, whatever order, those 3 are off the board. Basically, the Kings have the opportunity of Jaden Ivey right in their lap, or they could maybe take a flyer on a Shaedon Sharpe or Keegan Murray, or they consider trading back. I'll ask you first. What in that scenario you think makes the Pacers not necessarily desperate, but hungry or willing and actively trying to move up to 4?
Yeah, when I did my draft lottery preview, Matt, I said, I think something the Pacers would like if they don't move up is someone who's really trying to win this coming season to move up. The Blazers, the Kings, something. And then the Kings did, because now if the Pacers do want to move up, there is a team that in theory could be a trade partner for the Pacers who, despite being terrible last year, do have vets that could in theory facilitate something like this happening. So to your question, would the Pacers want to get involved? They don't pick high very often. It's their first single-digit pick since the 1980s, right? So to me, if you have this opportunity, getting the absolute best player you think you can reasonably obtain makes a lot of sense to them. And if they view it as, it seems like a lot of the experts have pegged this draft as the top 3 that you just mentioned, and then sort of Jaden Ivey's usually 4, and then another tier behind that. If they view it similarly, or they have Ivy higher, or they think they can get one of the top 3 guys because something crazy happens, then I think the Pacers might aggressively try to move up. Kevin Pritchard and his, he's talked a lot about one of his drafts with Portland, where he walked away with Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge in the same draft. He was trading like crazy that night to make that happen. If he views a guy that he wants to get, he said I think every GM says the same words, right? But after the latter, he said, we'll be aggressive to get our guy. No GM's like, well, we'll see what happens. But, I think that if the scenario lines up where the Kings are willing to move back and the Pacers identify a guy in that scenario that you just described, it'd probably be Ivy, but maybe it's Sharpe, maybe it's Keegan, maybe it's someone else. Who knows? That they really want to go get. I think it is possible, given where these 2 teams are headed, for a trade to happen.
Just so you know, after the mock draft happened, or rather, I'm sorry, after the draft lottery happened, I went on to NBA 2K and made sure that the draft order was the way it was, and I was able to work out the Kings trading number 4 to the Pacers to bring Tyrese Halliburton back. So I'm just saying it's a possibility. No, there are a lot of Kings fans.
What's the funniest outcome? Like Buddy Hield goes back to Sacramento in this trade,
and they trade De'Aaron Fox somehow, and it's just an absolute disaster. But we get months of content out of it. Okay, we know that's not happening. Tyrese is comfortably an Indiana Pacer. The Kings are happy with Domantas Sabonis, although Sabonis has sped up their timeline a little bit. They have basically 2 years until Sabonis' contract runs out to win some basketball games. And there's reports that there's basically a win now, make the playoffs mandate for this upcoming season. General manager Monty McNair hasn't extended his contract yet. He's going on the last year. So it seems like the pressure is on for the Kings to make a move. So this is why trading back makes sense in the case that the Kings could potentially, in a trade back, still get a really good rookie while also getting an already established NBA talent that can help them win right away. And Tony, the conversation that I've heard, I've seen on Kings social media, I've heard on the radio airwaves here in Sacramento is Malcolm Brogdon being that piece the Sacramento Kings would target. That's the first name I throw out there. What's the first thing that pops into your mind about the availability of Malcolm Brogdon in these kind of negotiations?
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating because, when I thought about the Pacers trading up using their vets, I look at the Kings, right? And they have Sabonis. And so some of the vets the Pacers would be considering trading would be like Miles Turner. I don't think Turner plus Sabonis is happening again in a different market.
Run it back.
Run it back, right? So that's out. Buddy Hield is out for a litany of reasons as well. And none of the rest of their vets have a lot of value except for Brogdan, right? So if for the Kings specifically, the only vet that makes sense in these discussions is Brogdan. So first of all, for the Kings and Pacers specific talks, great that if Brogdan is a piece that the Kings want, that this could happen again, and these 2 teams could be involved in a second big trade. in the matter of, what would this be, 4 months? Because while Brogdon is good, very good, in fact, two things have really changed the way he's kind of viewed in the Pacers ecosystem. One is that he's been hurt a lot, and I don't think that's a secret to anyone, even in Sacramento. He's averaged less than 50 games played in his 3 seasons with the Pacers. Granted, 2 of those seasons were shortened due to COVID reasons, but that's not a lot of games. He played less than half this past season, although, again, he missed time with COVID. They sat him out for they were resting him at the end of the season down the stretch. So he probably could have played closer to like 45, I'll say. But injuries in general have kind of made him a little less valuable here. And the other thing is, even though he is fantastic, Halliburton's better. Maybe not like way better right now, but definitely will be, and was close to this season. And when those two were on the court together, Matt, Malcolm Brogdon and Tyrese Halliburton on the floor for the Pacers, 201 minutes, minus 17.3 net rating for the Pacers this season. It's only 8 games. They were learning how to play together. I'm willing to give grace for such a small sample. That's terrible. Halliburton needs the ball all the time. If the Pacers are going to be a young and growing team, inserting another guard next to him who also requires the ball at times does not make a lot of sense. So I think that maybe they could try to make it work. Those two guys expressed that they fit well together. The coaching staff says we think it makes sense, but it didn't. So it would make sense to me I just talked about this on Locked On Pacers this week. It would make sense to me for the Pacers to explore trades for Brogdon, especially if it's in a situation where they can also accomplish their draft night goals of being aggressive and getting the player they want. So if this truly is something that the Kings want, I think this could be a really, really good fit.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Built Bar. We've been asking, and finally, Built Bar has delivered. Built granola bars are here. Built granola bars come in unbelievable flavors like chocolate peanut butter, my wife's favorite, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. That's my favorite. They're so delicious. And if you want to try all 3 flavors, you can order a mixed box right now. These are so different from their bars and their puffs. Built granola bars are loaded with granola. It's the perfect combination of crunch and chewiness. But just like bars and puffs, these babies are packed with protein and covered in 100% real chocolate. Only 150 calories, 15 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar. Built granola bars will change your world. Built has cracked the code to better granola bars, period. You won't find a better one on the market. That, in addition to their delicious puffs, which are protein-infused marshmallows. Yeah, that's a real thing. And, of course, their Built bars. You just cannot go wrong. Whatever you order on Built.com, a bar, a puff, a granola bar, make sure you use our excellent promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15. Locked15, LOCKED15, in order to get 15% off of whatever you order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. In addition to the Malcolm Brogdon conversation, we also have to, from the Kings' perspective, talk about a player who some make comparisons to Brogdon in some ways that's currently a King, which is Donte DiVincenzo, another player that the Kings acquired at the trade deadline from the Milwaukee Bucks in their 3-team Marvin Bagley deal. The Kings have wanted DiVincenzo for a while. He's a restricted free agent. I, at this point in time, would be shocked if DiVincenzo doesn't return unless the Kings pulled off a move like this where they acquired Brogdon and suddenly the necessity for DiVincenzo isn't as high, and maybe they're not willing to pay the money that they're willing to pay right now to bring DiVincenzo back. But you've watched DiVincenzo play, with him spending most of his career in the East with the Milwaukee Bucks, the Pacers, of course, being in the East. When you think about Brogdon compared to Donte DiVincenzo, are there significant differences? Is one significantly better than the other, or slightly better than the other in your mind? If the Kings had to choose between the two, do you think they'd lean in any one particular direction?
Yeah, Brogdon, I think, is like a little better at DiVincenzo at everything, basically. The defensive end's the biggest separator to me. Not that DiVincenzo is like an awful defender or anything, but I would definitely not call him an overwhelming positive on the end of the floor necessarily. You could speak to that better than I could. Whereas Brogdon, especially on the ball, has really grown as a defender a lot. He gets beat by quicker guards sometimes, but a lot of players do because they're fast. So that's his biggest area for growth, I think, as a player in general, is on those speedy guards. But Brogdon's much better on defense to me. And on offense, I think Brogdon's biggest pro is that he can toggle between 2 roles pretty effectively. If he's asked to be the point guard and play make, he's pretty good at that. His assists per game, if he would have qualified for the leaderboards because he was hurt so much, would have ranked 16th in the league this year, I believe. That's good. That's really high. You don't think of him in that way when you think of Malcolm Brogdon, but he is a pretty good passer and really good at kind of running an offense and setting up plays. But he can also toggle that off-ball role really well. 50, 40, 90 is that off-ball guy with Milwaukee. Had a really nice shooting season with the Pacers under Nate Bjorkgren that was the most actualized he's been when they were running a lot through Sabonis. Karis LeVert was involved in the playmaking. He shot very well from 3 that season. This past season, he had to take more off the dribble threes. And the first season with the Pacers when Oladipo was hurt, more off the dribble threes. But he can toggle between those two roles. So that's where I think he separates himself from Dante as well, is he can play at a high level off and on the ball, whereas Vincenzo, I think, requires the ball a little more to be at his most effective. So I think Brogdon's the better of the two in most areas. I think I get what you're saying, that Dante could be on that path, but I don't think he'll quite ever reach Brogdon's level.
I do agree with that. And I do see, even though I'm a fan of Dante DiVincenzo, I do see Malcolm Brogdon as the immediate upgrade, assuming that he can stay healthy. Again, Dante DiVincenzo is also coming off of a pretty significant injury and has not gotten back to what he was for Milwaukee before that injury too. So we're not talking about a completely healthy guy versus a perpetually injured guy. But Brogdon, I mean, you look at his injury history, and it's not necessarily the best over the last 3 seasons, 54 games, 56 games, then just 36 games this last season. So there are definitely some concerns there. How much do you think those injury concerns drive down Brogdon's value, not just in this hypothetical trade up conversation between the Kings and the Pacers, but in general?
I think it has to, not a lot, but a pretty fair amount. I mean, you kind of always imagine, I don't know how much front offices weigh this in, but you kind of always imagine in your head when you think about the perfect actualized version of any basketball team, that every player plays like 70 games or more, right? Brogdon has never done that. I think once, actually, his sophomore season or second season, he played over 70. It's just not something he's ever done, right? You have to kind of think in your head that he's going to be hurt for some portions of every season. And it's a lot of little things for him every year that pop up. And, he's the king of the most random, like, oh, he's suddenly questionable and no one has any idea why. So if it was like, one fluky muscle thing that happened over and over, maybe you think a strong rehab department could help. Or if it was a bunch of fluky things, kind of like Gordon Hayward has a lot of fluky injuries, maybe. But I just think he is a little more frail than a lot of players in his position. And that certainly has to be a negative, to me at least, in a guy's value, because you're probably only expecting 50 to 60 games from him a season.
What I like a lot about Malcolm Brogdon, we talk about the immediate impact. We also talk about the Kings needing to change their culture in so many ways. It's just been a culture of losing, a culture of piss poor defense. Davion Mitchell is trying to change that. They now hired Mike Brown, who's known as a more defensive-minded head coach. So in a lot of ways, Brogdon helps check some of those boxes, brings that dog mentality defensively. I think you'd be an excellent type of player in Mike Brown's system. I'm curious what you think about the significance that Brogdon can have impacting winning culture, and assuming he stays healthy, helping bring the Kings. I'm not saying he's going to immediately vault the Kings into the playoff conversation. It's going to have to be an improvement by committee, but he's checks that box, that type of guy that the Sacramento Kings are looking for.
Yeah, the most recent season the Pacers had, despite them being awful, was Brogdon's first year where he had to be kind of the off-court leader. They didn't have Vic anymore. He was clearly at least one of their best players coming off the season before. And, they had a miserable 2020-21 season, and Kevin Pritchard challenged the team after the season. He said, I need someone to step up and be a leader. We don't have that role right now. And Brogdon did it. That was something he took upon himself, and he talked about a lot, coordinating team events, including a workout in California for the Pacers last summer, locker room leader as well. That they needed someone to step into that role, and he did it. He also, super charitable guy, has his Hoops 2.0 thing going on in Africa where they install water wells every summer, is a part of the NBA Players Association. He's a vice president for that crew, like very involved community guy, super good locker room guy who's growing in that area. Like from a culture perspective, I know a lot of people in Indiana, especially because there's been 2 coaching changes in the last couple of seasons, have kind of questioned this team's culture. I don't think Brogdon's been like totally hands off in that, but I think he's a good off-court guy in terms of the way he impacts the community and impacts the team, despite the Pacers kind of floundering in that department the last couple of years.
In our next segment, we're going to talk about the possibility of this trade and these trade talks from a Pacers perspective. So I don't want to spoil anything too much, but with the conversation in Sacramento revolving around Malcolm Brogdon and 6 for 4, the Kings would have to throw in some financial filler in order to make things work. So it definitely wouldn't be that trade verbatim set in stone. But do you think it would be absurd or asking too much of Sacramento to want additional more than likely draft compensation in addition to Brogdon? Or do you think that would be a reasonable request because of Brogdon's injury history and the jump from 6 to 4?
Not at all. I think I quite rate Brogdon, and we'll talk about what his value would be in a second when we talk about the flip side for the Pacers side here. But even if he played 60 to 70 games every year, given the history of trading up in the lottery, I think he would probably take more anyway. Not a ton more, but a little bit more. And we'll talk about a recent trade too that's kind of relevant here. So no, I think it'd be smart of the Kings to ask for more. I mean, they jumped up to 4 in a lottery that is commonly considered a 4-player draft. Like, that's huge in terms of the value of this pick. So I think the Kings would be smart to, hang whoever over a barrel is coming to try to get number 4.
Today's episode of Locked On Kings also brought to you by BetOnline. They continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports information. You get all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including the NBA Finals, Major League Baseball scores happening right now, fights, even next season's NFL futures are all available right now on BetOnline. Plus, you can still use that Kings knowledge to make yourself some money with fun prop bets and side bets and future bets for the Sacramento Kings all off season. It's not just during the regular season that you can cash in on that. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, you tell me. Am I on my way to a good deal for the Sacramento Kings in that conversation with Tony East? Do you like the idea of the Kings trading down from 4 to 6 if they can get Malcolm Brogdon and future first-round picks in addition to that? Let me know at Matt George Sack on Twitter. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Of course, a lot of this has to do with who the Kings are confident that they can get at 6. I personally would be very interested in this deal if I knew that Keegan Murray was available at 6. I don't know if he's going to make it past the Pistons at 5, so that's a risk that potentially I would be taking there. But that's where I'm leading. I haven't agreed to this deal in our ultimate mock draft yet. I have other negotiations out there, but this is certainly something that we are discussing. What do you think about that move? Would you say yes? Would you say no? Would you want more? Let me know at Matt George Sack on Twitter again, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section and down below. Now we're switching gears, doing something a bit different here. Very different, actually. I am playing for you a interview involving a former Los Angeles Laker that many of you might consider to be our mortal enemy, Robert Horry. He appeared on an episode of Locked On Today talking about the NBA Finals, previewing the NBA Finals between, of course, the Celtics and the Warriors. Trust me, we are required to play this. That is why it is playing here at the last segment of today's Locked On Kings episode. I actually, honestly, truthfully, listened to the episode. I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm a fan of Robert Horry, the analyst. I think he has great things to say. It's a great get for the network to be able to have him on. So he has some great points, great conversation, about 12 minutes about the NBA Finals. If you can look past, of course, Horry's infamous shot and maybe your hatred towards him because of that shot, and listen to this conversation, I think you really will enjoy it. I certainly did. And of course, I will be back for you on the next episode of Locked On Kings. On the other side of this interview, I'll share with you what I am doing on the next episode. I have a great guest. Looking forward to continuing our NBA draft conversation. You will hear that. I'll tell you who I'm talking to after this conversation with Robert Horry on the Locked On Today show.
The Golden State Warriors are -150, the favorites in the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. Joining me now, Robert Horry, 7-time NBA champion, is here courtesy of BetOnline. Check out BetOnline for all the up-to-date lines on the NBA Finals, Finals MVP, Finals props, and each and every game line. This is great to have you here. Why do you think, because the line has moved a little bit in the Celtics' favor, why do you think there are people that like the Celtics matchup against the Warriors?
Because the smart people know defense wins championships. And if you look at the Celtics team, they got 2 players on that team that made the all defensive team. Smart, of course, defensive player of the year, but Robert Williams is one of those guys that is an eraser. He can block shots. He can, he can erase a lot of mistakes that you make on the perimeter. And you think about, you got Brown, Tatum, and Smart, who can get up on people defensively and funnel them to that guy. Next thing you know, it's getting blocked. And if you look at the way, Hartford has been playing, he's turned back the hands of time. He's blocking shots again. So overall, I think that the Celtics is a better defensive team than the Warriors, because even though you have Draymond Green, Klay Thompson is not the Klay Thompson of old who can do the things he used to be able to do. And so I just think that's a big key for them, for the Celtics, that is.
How do you see Defensive Player of the Year Marcus Smart matching up with Steph Curry? Is that going to be something where you see that Marcus is going to pick him up 94 feet. Like, how do you think Smart is going to approach that assignment if he does get that assignment, which we assume he's going to?
But you know what? I don't think it's going to be a one-man job. If you look at the Celtics, they 1, 2, 3 are all athletic guys, and you go to the 2, Jalen, and go to the Tatum, they get taller. You know, it's like like the bars on a cell phone. And I think even though they like to do a lot of switching, I think they're perfect for this matchup. It's a perfect matchup for the Celtics, and when they got to guard them, because Clay is going to be constantly moving. And so sort of, not the same as a Jimmy Butler or Tyler Hero, but I think what they just did against the Heat is like a prelude to what they're going to do. And so I think they're going to be fine defensively switching and getting ready for Steph.
It sounds like you like the Celtics in this one.
All my Laker fans are going to be mad at me because they say you cannot wear anything green and you can never root for the Celtics. I'm not rooting for the Celtics. I would like to see my former teammate, Ime Udoka, win his first championship, so I would like for that to happen. But, I just think being the basketball mindset, I just think that there's a good chance the Celtics could win this thing.
All right, so we have some odds here. Celtics in 6 is plus 375. Celtics in 7 is plus 650. If people are going to bet on it, what is your prediction? If you like Boston, 6, 7?
Hey, you know what? If you try to make some money, right? that's why you gamble. And so I would go with the Celtics in 7 because I think the Celtics have been a battle-tested team on the road. They've won a lot of games on the road. They just won the Eastern Conference on the road, and so I think they're ready. Not saying everybody will say, well, the Heat is a different monster than, the Warriors and blah, blah, blah. But I still think it all boils down to having confidence and playing well on the road and believing that you can win on the road.
There's also been this discussion now, especially among Celtics fans, about what this Celtics team has had to face, particularly who Jason Tatum has had to face. Kevin Durant in the first round, Giannis Antetokounmpo in the second round, Jimmy Butler on a heater, no pun intended, for Miami, and now Steph Curry. You're talking about at least 3 pantheon guys who are all-time great players. Who do you think has the most on the line legacy-wise in this series? For whom would that one title, you won 7, who would that one title mean the most for?
I'm going to go off script a little bit, and I'm going to stop people from thinking this is going to be the greatest run ever by the Celtics. That's not true, because you got Hornacek, Karl Malone, you got Kevin Johnson, Charles Barkley, you got Dennis Rodman, MVP, David Robinson, then you got Shaquille and Penny. Now that is the greatest run back in 95. So when people say this might be the greatest run, stop it. You know what I'm saying? Because all these teams was 50 plus win teams. And so I just think if you look at this game and you have to pick an MVP, of course it's going to be Tatum, but this run that the Celtics are on is incredible. Don't get me wrong, because they've been able to win on the road, which is key, because you have to win on the road in order to win championship. That's unless you have home court advantage and you protect your home court. But I just think overall, when you look at the makeup of these two teams, they're similar. Golden State Warriors, they were the Celtics 6-7 years ago when they first entered the playoffs. And nobody thought they could win a championship. Next thing you know, they win a championship. Then the following season, they win all these games and don't win a championship. And then they get KD, then they win 2 more. But I think if you look at the Celtics, there are so many similarities with these teams that people are always going to say, oh, let's go with the veteran leadership. Let's go with the fan favorite and Steph. Let's think about it, because everybody wants Steph to win, because we know he got robbed one time with the MVP in the finals, and then he took a step back and let KD come in to his team, which is Steph's team, and take 2 MVPs. And so I do think Steph has a lot to prove, and his legacy is on the line when it comes to this, because all the chatter now is about him not having a MVP in the finals, which we all know he was robbed and won. So let's be real about that.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at these MVP odds as you're talking about the MVP, and we expect Curry and Tatum right at the top in terms of the odds. You're not getting really good value there. I'm looking at Jaylen Brown 10-1. Yeah. I'm looking at Draymond 22-1. Like, if he really turned it up defensively, people forget in that game 7 against the Cavs, he had a triple-double in that game. He was the best Warrior on the floor in that game. I'm looking at Marcus Smart at 40-1. It seems like you can get some good value. And we've seen, including in this Warriors run, that it's not always the stars who win these finals MVPs.
It's true. For me, if I wanted to take the odds, I'm going to eliminate the top three automatically. And I don't think Clay is, Clay is a game 5, game 6 type of player. But me, I would go with Andrew Wiggins. If I had to pick someone with the odds, I would go with Andrew Wiggins, who is 20-1. And think about it, he has started to come into his own.
Yep.
After that dunk on Luka, all of a sudden this dude is smiling big. He's enthusiastic. He's playing hard, and he's an all-star. I think some people forget he was an all-star. I think this is a good way, the biggest stage, to show everybody that the all-star committee didn't make a mistake. So if I had to take because I don't think Draymond Green, he doesn't shoot enough, and he's gonna have to guard too many people. So he's gonna be all over the board. So if you look down that list of people and you want to say odds maker, for me, I would take Andrew Wiggins 20-1.
That is, that's bold. I love it. I think you're right that he seems to be a different player. Just in the Warriors, just in Golden State, he seems to have been unlocked a little bit, whether that's Steve Kerr, whether that's just him feeling more comfortable. We're talking about legacy. And you have been on some teams that have gone on these multi-year runs that have been what we might consider dynastic, right? There have been some discussions here. If the Warriors win one, that because it's the Clay, Steph, Draymond core with Steve Kerr, that this has to be considered part of the Warriors run and that we have to call them a dynastic team. Where do you fall on that discussion? If they win one, are they a dynasty?
You know what? I will put them in that category as a dynasty. Because they was riddled with injuries,
right?
2 years, Clay was out, and Steph went out. You say, okay, we'll give them a Phil Jackson asterisk by those 2 years. But if they're able to get back to the mountaintop and win this year, I would put them. You got one more step to be a dynasty, and then if they go to the finals again, then I would give them a dynasty. But think about this: they gave us a dynasty in the Lakers. We won 3 in a row, and next thing they dismantle a team, they go back and lose. It's considered a dynasty. So to me, there's only been 3 dynasties in this: Bulls, the Celtics, and the Lakers, because they're in a situation where they went 6+ championships. That's what you look at. But in this day, in this era, you can give them a dynasty.
I think I would consider the Spurs, the Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich Spurs in that mix, but they never won back-to-back titles. And so it depends on how you want to qualify it. Sustained success, not always enough. I think if you're a Boston fan, you're going, why can't we have that sustained run? We've got these 2 young superstars, Marcus Smart, Defensive Player of the Year, who's coming into his own a little bit defensively. It seems like they've unlocked some things with him as their pure point guard in initiating offense because he doesn't have to create for everyone. They've got Tatum and Brown who can create for themselves. I mean, what do you think the chances are that they could be not the next dynasty, but the next team that you have to deal with in the Eastern Conference? Like, okay, they're going to be there every year until further notice.
I think you look down that line and you says, okay, Tatum, first team, max. Brown, max. Smart, max. These are super max contracts these guys potentially can get. Right. So now since I cover the Lakers got $40 million guys, $40 million guys. They can't get nobody else on the team unless they do some hell of a drafting, and they get those guys that's going to be there. But it boils down to payday, man. If you're going to stick around and get paid, or you're going to have that one falter and say, we didn't win a championship, we need to make a move because, they exploited us in this area. We need to get someone in, and they trade one of those guys. People do dumb things like that. Well, GMs, I should say. So I think they have the potential to make a long run. They're just going to have to stick together and do what a Tim Duncan would do and say, I'm going to take less money so you can sign a Tony Parker, you sign a Manu Ginobili. But are these guys now, selfless enough where they say, hey, you know what? I don't want to make $40 million. I'll make $30 million. I don't think so. I think every guy now is trying to get their bag so they can say, you know what? At one point in my career, I was making 50, 40 million, whatever it may be. So that's going to be the key though. It boils down to money if they can keep that team together.
All right. Not a finals question, but I can't talk to Big Shot Bob and not ask you this question. Which of your big shots is your favorite?
I grew up a Lakers fan, a huge Magic Johnson fan. And one of my biggest thrills before I even made it to the NBA, I got to play one-on-one with Magic, when I was being scouted by the Lakers coming out of college, coming out of University of Alabama. So the shot I made against the Sacramento Kings in 2001 to win that game is probably my favorite. And don't get me wrong, I love what I did in Houston. I love what I did in San Antonio. But everything I did in San Antonio was on the road, Game 5 on the road. But this was at home in Staples Center. And the ego comes into play where you want to hear that crowd chant your name, man. And you run off the court and the crowd's still chanting your name. You in the locker room, you can still hear them chanting your name. So I think that shot, it takes over all the other shots just for the ego. You know, all as athletes got some type of ego. And I think for me, that just takes over because I had the Laker fans chanting my name. They wasn't chanting Shaq. They wasn't chanting Kobe. They were chanting Horry. So that's a big plus for me.
You made it through. Congratulations. I know it was tough to listen to Robert Horry, but I appreciate you doing that. If you want to respond to anything that Robert had to say, please do so as well. Feel free. I know there's still some pent-up feelings and pent-up frustration. Believe me, if I had the opportunity to interview Robert Horry, I don't know if I'd be able to keep my composure. But hey, that's just me. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope, of course, you enjoyed my conversation with Tony Easton. I hope you'll stick around for the next episode of Locked On Kings, as I'm going to be joined by Bobby Gerald. Yes, that's the son of Kings legendary radio broadcaster Gary Gerald, but he's much more than that. Bobby Gerald is a NBA draft guru, NBA draft analyst. He has dedicated like 30 years of his life to just deep dive studying each and every NBA draft class. And it goes way beyond just the lottery or the first round or even the second round. Bobby puts together boards and covers and does in-depth dives on an entire draft class, 100 plus players every single year. So to have him on, of course, we're going to be talking a lot about what the Kings should do at the 4th pick and who he likes for the Kings at 4 and at the top of the draft and stuff like that. But Bobby is such a great NBA draft mind, and more often than not, he gets his picks and gets his boards right. To have him back on Locked On Kings tomorrow, it's a real treat. I think you're going to enjoy that conversation, so I hope you will join me for that. Until then, thank you so much for your support. Can't wait to have you join me next time. My name is Matt George. You've been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.